Arteta! What a strike! What a screamer! Zola! And a fantastic goal! Arsenal back in it! And here's Liverpool, lines it up, finds the net. Arsenal are in front.
Yes, there's a global health pandemic, and yes, there's climate change, and yes, there's geopolitical strife, but we know the apocalypse is upon us because they were singing Mustafi's name at Bournemouth. This is the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast. My name is Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter, Yankee Gunner. That's right, Arsenal fans singing Mustafi's name and in actual support. It was quite a thing here, and to be fair, if that is the last time he plays this season, and it's unclear that that is the case, it's nice to know that he gets to go out, having heard his name sung, was playing well, and deserve the credit. Good for him. We got an awesome show lined up. Tim and Clive are here. I'll introduce them momentarily. Amy Lawrence is here. She'll be talking about the Academy kids and maybe a little bit about transfers as well at the end of the pod. So, of course, as we are always saying, we want to thank The Athletic for giving us access to some of the best writers and Arsenal people on the planet. And of course, if you want to sign up for that, you can do it at theathletic.com/Arsenal Vision. We'd love to have you as a patron. We've got lots of Patreon content planned this week. But if you don't want to do any of those things, no big deal. Like, honestly, we just love that you're here. We love that we all get to chat Arsenal. And today is a fun day to do it because the FA Cup tie at Bournemouth was a pleasure. It was a pleasure to watch. Maybe the second half was a little dull, but you know what? It more than made up for it in the first half. And we'll be talking about how the kids are all right. I think it is fair to say that our cup runneth over with young talent. And it is wonderful to see. As the kids say, you love to see it. Tim is on Twitter at Stoberto. Hello, Tim.
Hello there.
Clive's on Twitter at ClivePAFC. Hello, Clive.
Hello.
Recording a little earlier in the day for me, so the coffee's still waiting to take effect. So, if I'm not at my sharpest, you won't know the difference. In any event, let's kick it off with this. So, Tim, I loved this game, and the second half was maybe a little ugly, and we just sort of ground it out, but the first half was a delight, and I think with maybe a minor exception, the last 5 minutes or so of the half, one of the just best performances we've seen in a long time. I know that there were some good performances in the early stages of the Europa League group with some of the young kids shining, but this was sort of one of the best ones we've seen in a while. And it was, I think, a big night for some of the young kids to sort of reintroduce themselves to the team, like Joe Willock, and we'll get on to him. I'm reminded a little bit of, ironically, an FA Cup tie a couple of years back. We played Southampton away after having lost to them in the league, and which we seem to do every season. And then we played a much changed 11, as did they. I think it was Ainsley Maitland-Niles only ever start in central midfield for us, and we really dominated them, and a lot of the kids played well. And in that case, I don't think it really was a harbinger of much, but this felt different. This felt really important. I'm curious for you if watching this game, if it's starting to maybe click a little bit that the academy talent that we have and that the young kids that we have at the club are forming a core group that really does have the potential to be very, very special going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the things that we were excited about at the beginning of the season. It wasn't it was kind of, there were a couple of phases to the excitement. There was the transfer business, which a lot of people thought was broadly quite good. And then there was this kind of, we had this kind of tangible set of academy products underpinning that, who I think most of us were kind of realistic enough to know, right, these guys, if one of them might become a star, and at the moment that looks more like Martinelli than anyone, but that can obviously change. But we've got a set of academy kids kind of coming through, buttressing the squad a little bit, and that's one of the things we're excited about. But one of the excitements that just completely ebbed away in the fug of the end of the Emery era, when his goose was cooked and the team became a bit of a mess. So look, I still don't expect all of them to play perhaps as they did against Bournemouth every single time they play, because that's not the deal with young players. You've got to put up with the fact that they're going to be a little bit inconsistent. And you look, Joe Willock, I'd say has been pretty inconsistent this season, and I kind of accept and expected that. He's had really good performances, and he's had some quite indifferent ones, and Monday night at Bournemouth was a really good one. So and even within this game, actually, we probably get onto this, but we've still got this problem where we can't quite play for 90 minutes at the moment, but we're getting there. We're getting more and more minutes. We're building up a little bit to it. But yeah, so in terms of the young players, I think what's really positive actually about the kind of the negative that's turned into a positive is because the league season is not quite a write-off, but as close as we're probably ever going to get to. Even if the results themselves aren't inconsequential per se, at least the mood around them is not quite as fevered. So I think people at the moment are a bit more accepting of stuff like drawing at home to Sheffield United and drawing away at Crystal Palace. That doesn't cause the same anxiety it used to because people are kind of broadly behind the project, at least for now, and can sense a direction of travel. And so what we can actually do for the rest of the season is really look at some of these kids. And again, I'm not saying throw them all in together at the same time and just like fuck everyone else off, because that doesn't really work either in terms of development. But what we can really do, per your conversation, I think after the Chelsea podcast along this lines, we can look at Saka at left back and say, okay, let's give him 10-15 games here, let's see what he's got, let's see if he can perform consistently, and then maybe we don't have to spend 7-8 million on a backup left back. Perhaps we've got that there. Let's look at Ainsley Maitland-Niles and say, do we need to buy a backup right back? Is that his position? Can he play in midfield? Does that then negate the need for another midfielder? And start to just really look at some of these players and see where they fit next year. I think that's where a lot of the squad is at the moment. We're looking at, we're almost looking towards next season already and what kind of role that some of these players can have. And for someone like Willock, I think it's really, telling that he was chosen ahead of Dani Ceballos, for example, because I think Arteta's thinking, even if Ceballos doesn't go in January, I think he's very much thinking, well, we're not going to spend 30 to 35, 40 million or whatever it is to buy him from Real Madrid at this stage. So, he's not really in my future plans, but Joe Willock is a player I want to look at and I want to see what he can do in this position. And I think, to be fair, he's making a few decisions like that. He's made the decision actively not to loan Nketiah out again. Which is a fairly surprising decision. And, Martinelli, he doesn't have to play Martinelli at the moment. He didn't have to play him at Bournemouth. He had Ozil and Lacazette on the bench, and I realised that both those players probably need a rest. But there are other players there. So this isn't entirely driven out of necessity, I don't think. Maybe partially. I mean, he could have started Lacazette and said, well, do you know what? Aubameyang's back for the next game anyway, so I just give Lacazette one more game. We haven't played for 6 days, and then I'll rest him for Burnley. He didn't do that. He wanted to look at Nketiah. So I think there's some projecting forward going on here. And players like Saka and obviously Martinelli, and even Nketiah last night getting on the score sheet, that's just giving the manager food for thought, because he must be thinking about the summer already and how he's going to shape this squad.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I mean, I think the previous manager would have played Ozil and Lacazette and, probably Torreira and taken the game very seriously and been intent on winning it. And I think, Arteta showed tremendous character in saying, I'm going to trust my young kids. This is an opportunity for them to go out and impress. I realize it's just Bournemouth, but it was just Shrewsbury that drew Liverpool 2-2. These things can happen in the cup. And we did fail to beat Bournemouth the last time we played them, and I realized this was sort of a changed Bournemouth as well, but it's an away game. It's a lot of young players. I mean, between Nketiah, Saka, Willock, Martinelli, Guendouzi, I mean, there's some experience there certainly, but it's very, very young players. And they all did really well. I think they all acquitted themselves really well. So let's drill into some of the performances, Clive, and I guess the first one that we can come to is Willock. So, look, we can only evaluate the performances as we see them. And I think that there is this tendency for everybody to want to puff out their chest and say that they know what's going to happen. No, he's not going to make it. Nelson's not going to make it. Saka could. And Nketiah won't. I mean, we don't know. Saying we know is crazy because we don't know. We can have suspicions. I think we are in the opinion business. All of us, whether you're on Twitter or Facebook or a podcast or just in your local, we're in the opinion business. And that's great. But I want to judge the performance, because I think that's tangible and that's evidentiary. So I thought this was a great performance from Willock, and I think you can contrast it with what Ozil does in this respect. Willock, I don't think, is a particularly great passer. I don't think that he's necessarily got the vision, certainly, that Ozil has, or the execution of pass, but he's extremely direct, sort of like what Pepe does in a way. He gets the ball and he goes forward. That's his remit. Get the ball, go forward. Drop back, collect the ball, go forward. And I think we saw another way for the number 10 in Arteta's system to operate. And I thought it was a really interesting contrast with how Ozil operates in that position. And that's not to knock Ozil. It's just to sort of see a different way for it to be done. So how did you rate Willock's performance? And in particular, the way it's a different approach to that position for us?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I quite agree it's a 10 per se. I think it's a
support striker.
Attacking midfielder. I mean, we spoke about it last week, didn't we? We called it the wing fielder role.
Yeah.
So when we go in a 2-3-5, he's the one to the right of the central striker, and Martinelli to the left of the central striker. I think he's got more two-way duties, so he's more of a midfielder, and the guy to the left is more of a forward. Right, so Aubameyang does that role in the first team per se. Then we overlap with a high left back. Look at us talk about a system like we've known it all our lives, and that shows you how well it does, isn't it? We talk about a system that we do not even debate on the podcast because it's so clear, it's so well constructed,
great point,
it's so well communicated, and we talk about it like if we knew it. But I didn't know about this 2 months ago, and I watched Man City play. It wasn't clear to me. You know, how they overload wasn't clear to me. It feels so clear, and it's just it's a credit to the manager that he's done that, and we understand it, which means the players understand it. And I see Willock in that role, and I see it being two-way. I see him just almost sneaking behind the midfield, and the moment he does, he's off. He's off to the races, and everyone's backing off, and people are running off him, and we looked very good. And I'm conscious of the levels. But I also remember the Bournemouth away game recently, and maybe Tim's got a better view. I remember Dan Gosling doing a bit better than he did yesterday. You know, I thought we made him look quite good in the other game, and I felt in this game he was running around, being boshed off by Guendouzi, being boshed off by Willock, and forced to do running he did not want to do. You know, and so I did like Willock's game. I do like what he can be without knowing what he actually is, and I find myself not caring. What I did see was a player that did the first hour and 15, maybe hour and 5 really, really well, got moved out to the right-hand side, faded a bit, and maybe could have come off 10 minutes sooner. On the period where he was on, I thought his selection, pass selection, when to run, when to drive, when to let go of the ball, when to press, when to support press, when to, disconnect from his markers and create space. He didn't always receive at the half turn beautifully like Ozil does, but he kept it, even though it might have been a bit ugly. When it was in an area that he liked and it has forced him to roll people and run people, then you can see he was a lot happier doing that. So his development, if we can get him to receive it like Ramsey and Ozil can, that smooth sort of half turn, just roll around a corner and he's off. Once he perfects that, he's going to be a danger in between the lines, because when he gets it, he's not knocking it off 5 yards to the right or left. He's saying, come and get me. Right? So he's offering a whole new threat. And I think it's going to be quite interesting to see him technically develop. He's obviously got a shot from the edge of the air, which you saw at Liverpool. He's not afraid to shift and shoot on the edge of the area. So his potential is quite big. I'm not saying that we need to build a team around him, but I thought people have doubted him, as they do doubt some of the younger players. I'm sure you'll come on to a couple later on in the podcast.
Get to all of them, yep.
Yeah, and I think, just as a note, I think sometimes we can play them to a point where they get tired and flatten out. And what Arteta has done quite skillfully, I feel, is sit a couple down, and they come back in this game. I thought we saw them back to what they used to be.
Yeah, you make a really interesting point there, Clive, right? Which is, let's say Aubameyang has 3 games where he's playing poorly. You know what Aubameyang is, so you don't think, oh, maybe he's no good. But if a 16-year-old, well, not 16-year-old, but if an 18-year-old has 3 bad games, we have a tendency to say he's never making it because we don't know what he is yet. And so we're constantly updating with the new information. And so, progress isn't linear any human development is not linear, right? There's setbacks and then there's bursts forward and so on and so forth. And so, I thought this was a good step forward for Willock. I think the irony for me is that he's athletic and he's powerful and he's strong, and yet I don't know that he's necessarily switched on enough defensively. I don't know if his defensive intensity is quite right yet, and I think that that's something that if he could add to his game would make him a really interesting opportunity for selection at that position more regularly, because I thought in some ways with Nketiah and Willock, maybe I expected our press from the front to be a little more effective, and I'm not sure that they were quite as good at it. Now, Lacazette is brilliant at that part of the game, and I think Nketiah, if he watches that, will learn a lot from it. But,
can I add one
please.
small counter to that? Only a small counter. Nketiah and Willock, I can't remember the last time they would have completed 90 minutes. So when we see them, we just expect them to just arrive at their top game. I thought they'd done really well to get that amount of football out of them on that game.
That's a great point.
I think you could see that Eddie was struggling with a little bit of cramp towards the end. Willock was struggling. I thought they blew themselves out for 70 minutes, and I think just to bear that in mind, that we expect them to arrive when they haven't really played football for a couple of months or so.
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, was it David Luiz in one of the post-match comments made the point, we're not there physically yet? I don't think any of the team is physically where Arteta needs them to be to play his way for 90 minutes yet. And we've seen that be a problem. But, the job was done to a greater extent at halftime in this game, so it didn't really matter. Yeah, I mean, I just think in general it was a really encouraging performance from Willock, though, for a kid who maybe had started to slip back a little from consideration. So that was great to see. One thing about Arteta, and Clive, you touched on the fact that we know his system now already, just a month in by heart. It's so important for the kids. If you want Aubameyang to play wide left one day and, play in a back three system one day and play center forward one day, he can do that. He's a 30-year-old experienced professional. For these kids, they need a communicator and they need a consistent instruction that they can follow. And they weren't getting that previously. And now they're getting both. They're getting someone who can communicate effectively and give them a job and give them a clear job. And that doesn't mean they're all going to make it. But I think in order for the young kids to develop, you give them a clear job where they know exactly what's expected of them and you communicate it effectively, and then you can see the difference it makes. And I think, Tim, one of the players who just continues to thrive, really in whatever position he's put in, is Bukayo Saka. He is thriving as a fullback right now, although in this system with the way Xhaka drops in, and I think this is what's so interesting about Xhaka making a 3 in the first phase of build-up, Saka's just allowed to just bomb forward. Just go. Go, buddy. We got this. You go up there and you go basically be a forward. And the overload on the left seems to be really confusing teams. And once again, credit to Mustafi hitting those big diagonals beautifully. Found Saka time and time and time again in acres of space on the left. I thought Saka's performance was brilliant, and I think the system really lets him emphasize the part of his game he's great at. He created a goal. He scored a goal from positions that you would consider to be more natural to him while playing fullback all game. So how impressed are you individually with Saka and with the way the system seems to give him a platform to thrive?
Yeah, I was hugely impressed. This is a player I've always liked. I've always been interested in. When some of the young players come in and you might flip-flop on, I've flip-flopped on Willock a bit, and I'm still not sure Nelson, what he is and where he'll go. Nelson, I've flip-flopped on a little bit. Maitland-Niles, I've kind of done the same. Nketiah, I'm still not sure about. But sometimes a young player comes through and you just think, yes, this is the golden child. This is the one I like, and this is the one I will probably defend even when he doesn't deserve defending. And this is like the candle I will hold. And I've kind of always felt like that with Bukayo Saka. And actually, I've always been interested in the idea of him as a fullback. And I'll say now, I'm still interested in the idea of Reiss Nelson as a fullback. I think that could work for the same reasons it's working with Saka. Because the thing is, and I don't know if players of Saka's this age, maybe they realise this better than some of the players that are 10 years older than them, that actually fullback is, for want of a better word, it's quite a sexy position now. Gone are the days when your worst player plays at fullback because you want them vaguely out the way. Players like Dani Alves and Marcelo have completely changed that, in my view. And they've brought, I think, maybe a little bit of glamour to the role, or at least I'm assuming that. Like, I'm 36, right? So I've got no idea what like 17, 18-year-old kids think watching fullbacks. Maybe they all still do think, no, I want to be a winger. Because this is the thing, right? Players, they always want to play different positions. It's always like, no, I want to play centre forward. I want to play central midfield. I want to play centre half. Like, not many players want to go out wide, or if they're out wide, they go, I don't want to be a fullback. I want to be a winger. And it's a lot
I'm reminded
of
Theo Walcott, who wanted to be a striker until he got to be a striker and then said, no, I'm a winger.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of it is, I think, just silly kind of status kind of stuff, and you just think, look, just play where you're best in the team. A bit like when Ramsey had that spell on the right, and it's just like, in this system, just play there, because it really works, and actually it's still a really prominent role for you. It's like, yeah, you're not playing as a number 8, but that's kind of fine because you're still really contributing. And I'm looking at Saka at left back, and it's funny actually, because some of the discussion is still he's out of position and we should push him up on the wing and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, should we? He looks like a really, really good fullback to me. And he's getting lots of end products from fullback as well. And I think part of that is, yes, because of the way Arteta's system is structured. And like you say, the left back is basically a winger anyway. But what we were doing really cleverly in the first half an hour against Bournemouth changed their formation because they realised this. But we were doing that thing where we were sucking them over to one side of the pitch, almost tilting the pitch, attracting them over to our right-hand side, getting them on Pepe, getting them on Bellerin, and then just hitting them with the switch. And we were doing it left to right as well. Xhaka was doing it nicely. So you've got Mustafi kind of whipping those crossfield balls really nicely. And then you had Xhaka doing it from left to right as well. And we were just attracting Bournemouth to us and hitting them with the switch. And we did that time and time again in the first half an hour. And yeah, I thought Saka was tremendous as well. And I don't think we need to obsess about this kind of, he's out of position. He might yet turn into a left winger, but I really like him at left fullback, and if he keeps playing really well at left fullback, I think we should fucking well play him at left fullback. Like, I don't quite. It reminds me of when I say like bringing glamour to the fullback role. I read an interview with Lucy Bronze, who's probably the best right back in the women's game, and she was talking about that. She was talking about, I want to like show like young girls that fullback is like a really good position, because the England women's team have an idiot for a manager in Phil Neville, and what he thinks
what do you really think?
So he sees Lucy Bronze playing at right back and playing really well, and he goes, I should put her in midfield. And it's like, no, you shouldn't, you fucking idiot. She's playing really well at right back. Just keep her at right back. and so that's kind of what I'm thinking. And look, this might just be a flash in the pan. He might get found out or whatever, or he might push up the pitch in a few weeks and play really well on the left wing and see that his future's there. But I think there's two things. He's producing end products from here, and I think that's maybe because from fullback you can make those overlapping runs and whip those balls in, and I think he's really good at that, that kind of Kolasinac style thing. And I also think it's because he's already established a really good partnership with Martinelli there. And when you've got a good partnership, that's really, really important. Good teams have that. Good teams have partnerships all over the pitch. And then it doesn't matter if you're in your favourite position or if you're in the position that everyone thinks you should be in, because that's where they put you on FIFA. If Saka and Martinelli really work on the left-hand side, keep them there. If it's great having Xhaka behind them to keep whipping passes into them, keep them there. We don't have to obsess about like individuals and where exactly they should stand, because this is where I think they should stand. And to me, I think Saka has got the makings of a really, really good athletic modern fullback who can get up and down, good stand-up tackler. He's got the athleticism, good at interceptions. He's good on the ball in tight spaces. When you give him the ball next to the touchline, your heart rate doesn't pick up. You know that generally speaking, he's going to keep it and he's going to use it. And so if he keeps playing like this, then he's playing better in this position than I think I've seen Tierney or Kolasinac play so far, and that might not last. Again, I accept that inconsistency is baked into the equation with young players, but I say keep him going there, and it could be another Ashley Cole or Hector Bellerin situation.
Yeah, I mean, just ask Matthew Debussy what happens when an academy kid makes a claim for the starting fullback position, right? I mean, you have to go with the person who's earned the playing time, and right now it would be Saka. The one thing I will say is we're also very clearly overloading the left-hand side with an intention to play Saka further up the pitch. At one point, Hector Bellerin was playing at the top of the D. Pepe is totally isolated out on the right to some extent. There was a funny moment in the game where Bellerin took like one step beyond Pepe outside of him, like he was going to overlap. And it was like a switch flipped in his brain. He's like, oh no, I'm not supposed to be there. And he like stopped and ran back a little bit. I mean, I don't think you could be any more clear that the plan is for Bellerin not to overlap Pepe and for Saka and Martinelli to get way up the pitch on the left-hand side and overload the deep wings on the left. So,
that makes sense because of Bellerin's current situation as well, because he's coming back from a serious injury and he's had hamstring problems. Makes perfect sense to moderate his role like that.
Yeah, and by the way, I think he's starting to look back to his best. I thought he was great in this game, but I think it's also the point, Tim, that if theoretically we got to a point where we said, okay, now we want to flip that and we want Bellerin overlapping and we want to overload the right-hand side, then maybe you might say now we're going to go with the more naturally defensive Tierney on the left. And push Saka back up to a wide forward position, right? And sort of ape the Pepe role, so to speak, or however he wants to structure it. I just think that there's a lot of flexibility there. And what's clear to me about Saka is, given the end product he has, whether his development continues to be as a fullback or whether it continues to be as a wide forward, we know when he gets into the attacking third, he can do real damage and be really devastating. And you need that. Ultimately, I mean, that is the difference between players making it and not making it, is their end product at some level. So, really exciting to see. Clive, I don't want to freeze you out of the conversation about Saka. Maybe you can just sort of add a little more of your own insight into how you think we were exposing those weaknesses in the Bournemouth defense. Because what would happen, it seems, look, Guendouzi was isolated in central midfield. There was a box of four Bournemouth defenders around him at all times. And in the first half, what was happening is they were sort of keying on him, but we didn't have anybody else in central midfield. And so Xhaka could stride out with the ball, or in a lot of cases, Mustafi would stride out with the ball. And like, for example, Willock would drift to the right, and Pepe was on the right, and Guendouzi was marked by two central midfielders, and there was all that space on the left, and Mustafi just kept hitting the long diagonals in Saka, and they couldn't live with it. Or he would break the lines to Willock, which he did really well, I think, for the goal. Was it the second goal where, Willock or Nketiah plays the wall pass to Willock, and then that's the second goal. Left. Yeah. So, I mean, do you see the system really trying to emphasize what Tim and I were just discussing, and has Saka sort of been the star of that for you?
He's been a beneficiary of it. He's almost like a bowling ball bowling down that side. Yeah. He just rolls down there. Everything's bouncing off him, and he just rolls past people. He just gets the ball to feet, turns around, and you just see an opposition body on the floor as he just rolls past them, gets across in. I know he had a bad game. I think it might have been against Bournemouth, and where he had a number of crossing opportunities, didn't quite go well. And I said then that he's a very good crosser of the ball, very intelligent crosser of the ball, calm under pressure in the final third. He just had a bad day, and I'm so glad he's proven that to be correct. When he's in that final third, you think something's good is going to happen. And that's a lovely feeling. When a player, you can smell fear around the player sometimes. You can smell fear around their ability on the ball. You just smell it. With him, my heart rate goes down, and I just expect him to deliver. And so I like him a lot. Again, I've said it before, when he was coming through as England Youth International, he was played at left back a number of times. I know he's had that role at Arsenal for a while, but they tend to play the superstar kids higher up, which is absolutely fine. And but there's no issues. I agree with Tim. There's no issues with him playing that role. What I will say, in the 2-3-5 system, or sometimes it's a 3-2-5, till Xhaka gets his ass up that left-hand side a little bit. What you do see with 5 up is you see the ability to retain width. You always have one of Pepe or Saka on the chalk-on boots. A little bit like a positional system that City have, always have somebody wide. When somebody's really wide, you stretch the defence, you get gaps. but also what it really does, it allows you to switch. It's all around the retention of width. My mate Woz always says that, retention of width. Keep your width wide. You got to be brave to do that, or you got to have a structure behind it. And guess what? That's what we've got. And the Bellerin role in this game, that's the role that Maitland-Niles was doing. Bellerin carried it nicely a couple of times a game, which is something I've forgotten that he does so well. And he really does challenge people that he's don't go beyond, just pop it off. Pop it off to one of your five, and we go from there. So, again, he's very good in transition because he's got fullback speed one-on-one, so he doesn't look so vulnerable on the break. And unless people start dropping it into our box, the structure looks really, really good. So, retention of width allows us to switch. You can see the future, can't you, with distributing centre-backs, distributors in centre midfield, which allows you to hit the positions on the pitch. That's Guardiola, position. Can you stay in your square? Can you own that? Can you own that zone and drive out of there? I think it's going to be interesting to see how I don't wish to see people go, but how we upgrade certain positions and what type of attributes those players come in with. The two centre-backs we've been linked with. They're passing centre-backs, distributors. We've obviously got Louise. Socrates may struggle in that structure going forward, and funny enough, Mustafi shone in that guard because his distribution has always been very, very good. So,
well, except against Chelsea for whatever the reason.
When he's facing the right way, I mean, the right way. Yeah. So, but let's be honest, we all know he can pass through those lines really, really smartly, right? So, so he now feels a little bit more confident because he's got a role to play, and so he had a. Well, the crowd told him he had a decent game last night, which I thought was really, really nice.
Yeah, classy. It was nice to see. Real quick, stay with you, Clive, just for a second. I don't want to spend too much time on it. Nketiah had sort of the Aubameyang game in a way. I'm not sure he was super involved. He ran a lot into spaces that are hurtful without really doing a whole hell of a lot, but he does get on the end of a nice cross from Saka into the corridor of uncertainty, and he slams it home for the goal that winds up winning us the game. I call it the Aubameyang game in a way because I'm not sure he did a lot else, and it's sort of hard to evaluate this game for him. I will say that his running creates a threat that is different to what Lacazette does. I don't think he pressed particularly as well, although you did bring up the good point that, look, he hasn't played a ton of football, and he would have tired pretty quickly. But do you have any just sort of quick thoughts on the impact he made in this game? Because honestly, Nketiah is one of those players who I have to admit, I've never been totally convinced he'd make it, or at least maybe make it in a limited squad role capacity, but I've never been sure. And I was really trying to watch him in this game. Unfortunately, the camera angle at Bournemouth is such that you can see about 3 yards of the pitch at any given time. Do you have any insight into his performance and maybe whether you think he has more of a role to play?
So I've never, I'm 50-50 on Eddie, but that's not important really. But maybe in the old school 4-2-3-1 where he's a lone forward, where he's got to keep loads of people busy on his own, I think he struggles with that. I call it Jermaine Defoe syndrome. Can you be a lone forward for a top team consistently? And it hasn't always worked out for him. And so when he went to Leeds, Bamford's physicality and his size in their system, which is a 4-1-4-1, he wasn't suited to that. But in our build-up with the 2-3-5, where he's got Martinelli and he's got Willock outside him quite close, suddenly he's not super isolated all of the time, and he can, they call it upset and through. You upset to him, he sets the ball to one of Martinelli or Willock, and they go through the lines on the second phase, right? That's the playing style, upset through, right? So he does that very, very well. It got me thinking about that centre forward role going forward. And I'm thinking, okay, we're criticising Lacazette a little bit because it's not a spectacular role. It's more of a pivotal role, a setting role, a pressing role, quite an industrial role, right? But he managed to get a passing lane and score his goal. So we're looking at him in comparison to Lacazette, and people are debating. But I look at that role and I think, okay, what do we need going forward for that role? Is it an Aubameyang role? Should he take that role? Or do we lose some of the danger and the ability to drive in from the side and shoot off your right foot? Not sure. Do we need something different in that role? Do we need, if you think about upgrade, do we need a taller person in that role, a penalty box killer in that role, somebody to really be a bit more physical in that role? And I'm just wondering how that role will develop next season. Is it Lacazette's role to own and get a new contract and that's it? will Eddie be able, in this system, I think Eddie will be able to underpin whoever's the primary person. Is that a role where you want Aubameyang to disappear into crowd scenes and we lose his ability to travel and see the play and arrive in the box at the right time? Or will we get more out of Aubameyang in his later years if he's much more central rather than tracking fullbacks on going the other way? I do think it's going to be interesting to see how we develop that 9 connection role in the middle of the 5. And I'm not 100% sure. I just threw out a few options there, but we may have to accept it's not spectacular. It's not spectacular. It's a working role, and the spectacular people are all around that individual pivot.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see Aubameyang playing center forward with the front 4 that we had in this game. You know, with Martinelli on one side, Pepe on the other, and Willock behind him. There's a lot of running power in there. And you know, I want to point one thing out about Nketiah's goal. Martinelli is not short of any praise right now, but his run makes that goal for Nketiah. And to some extent, I don't think Lacazette has benefited from these kinds of runs, and Aubameyang certainly would. Martinelli makes the near post run, darts to the near post, and I actually think Saka, maybe that was the pass that was on at first. I thought he was going to try to get it to him, but in fact he goes behind him to Nketiah. But that Martinelli near post run pulls Ake with him, and that's why there's so much space in the center of the box for Nketiah to finish it. And Martinelli's running is just so intelligent, and he's not just going to get goals. He's going to get goals for other players by pulling defenders out of position the way he did with that run. And Tim, you know, I'm not convinced that if Gilberto Silva was at Arsenal right now that the fans would like him. We just have a weird relationship with central midfielders right now. I don't know that we know what they're necessarily supposed to do. We like tackly guys like Torreira. You know, we like goal-scoring guys like Ramsey, understandably. But we don't seem to love guys like Guendouzi who do everything else. I think he was man of the match in this game. Now, admittedly, he's shown the most in a half where we struggled the most. And that may be why, you know, he's not getting more attention for this. But 5 dribbles, 1 really nice shot, 91% passing on 64 passes played, 4 tackles, an interception, 2 clearances, fouled twice, committed 3, and fouled a few more times I don't think he got. I don't think people love that he's spiky and winds people up. You know what I mean? I think there was a sense in this game maybe that, like, why are you trying to get them angry? Like, they're trying to capitulate. Just let them capitulate. And I have to admit, I am sympathetic to that view. I feel that we pulled them back into the game by making them angry, where they were just ready to roll over for us. But, you know, I mean, Guendouzi was operating basically as a one-man midfield, and as the game wore on, he just showed the ability to collect, turn, drive past defenders. You know, he is becoming increasingly press-resistant. He seems to have this sort of understanding of where the ball is going to go, when to step up, pinch up, and break up play versus when to drop in. I thought this was a great game, and he had a couple absolutely crucial clearances in the second half, by the way, deep in our box when they were putting us under a little bit of pressure. For me, a fantastic Guendouzi performance and a reminder that, you know, just because he's played, you know, 2,000 minutes, well, will be 2,000 minutes in consecutive seasons as a teenager, let's not write him off, or, you know, 20-year-old. Were you as impressed by what he did in this game?
Yeah, very. And I think what we've done a little bit is, again, just moderated his role a bit, or not so much moderated his role, but moderated some of the distance he needed to cover. So he was very much in that kind of right half space, and not, you know, under Emery where it was just like go and be a one-man tornado. It was very much, this is your area of the pitch, you know, kind of stay fairly close to Hector Bellerin. Granit Xhaka's over on the left, but sometimes he'll drop in, so you need to move, you know, shuffle across a bit more centrally. And I think maybe we saw from him some of the things that you maybe don't get from Torreira in that role, because I think against Sheffield United, my issue with the setup was that it was Torreira that was left on his own in the middle, and it was too much of a hole for me, particularly because Torreira is a much more reactive type of midfielder, and if you're looking to progress the game, that's not his forte. I think he's better at it than people think, but it's still not his forte. Yeah. Whereas Guendouzi is much more able to kind of just shuffle away from someone. He's really good at kind of just wriggling away from pressure, and he has a bit more of a passing range on him as well. And maybe he's not as defensively switched on as Torreira, but once he's in a duel, I think he's good. That's the thing. He's not bad at tackling or stopping opponents. It's just maybe he doesn't have. I'm not even sure it's positional sense of Torreira so much as Torreira's just perhaps a bit more agile and just gets over to danger, puts the fire out, gets rid of the ball quickly. I don't think Guendouzi quite has that, but when he is in the area of danger, I think he's very effective. And like you say, because he's so competitive, he's kind of good with those clearances, particularly on the edge of the box, and he is quite good as well at doing those fouls that aren't quite fouls. He's good at doing fouls that are definitely fouls, don't get me wrong, but he's quite good at, ball goes up in the air on the edge of the area, and just good at just leaning into the player and doing enough so that it's not a foul, but you're kind of impeding the opponent. And yeah, particularly as the game drew on and Bournemouth grew into the game, his ability to kind of wriggle away from pressure and draw fouls was really, really valuable. And I agree with you. I thought he was absolutely terrific. And look, I think it's a little bit different strokes for different folks as to who plays there, but he showed us some things that perhaps we just don't quite get from Torreira in that role, and he's put himself back on the map again, I think, because I think it was right for Arteta to sit him down for a bit. I think we were all of that mind before Arteta was kind of was appointed. I think we were all of the mind that perhaps Guendouzi just needed 4 or 5 games on the bench, and he's had that, and come back into the team. And yeah, I thought he was terrific. I thought he dominated his space. He wasn't trying to be everywhere. He wasn't trying to be up front and all things to all men and at centre back. He had his little area of the pitch. He shuffled across when he needed to, but largely just over on that right hand side. He provided real support for Bellerin and for Pepe as well, because we know that's one of the things Guendouzi is quite good at, and something he did a lot under Emery was just shuffle over to the slightly wide space, and particularly when you've got someone like Pepe who's not hugely intense off the ball, that's very valuable, and he just blocked some of those passing lanes, I think, quite nicely.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I saw a lot of comments sort of before the game that are like, when are we going to learn that the Xhaka Guendouzi midfield doesn't work? But that's not really how it operated, at least not in the first phase of play, right? Because Xhaka drops in and makes that 3, and Guendouzi is sort of alone in front of the back 3. But Xhaka and Mustafi had a lot of responsibility for sort of striding out and distributing. And then as the game wore on, Guendouzi found more space as Bournemouth tried to push forward, and he was able to bypass some of their defensive pressure. So it operates a little differently in Arteta's system. And well, Clive, let me just quickly ask you. I mean, do you think this is sort of just a little bit of a reminder about Guendouzi's qualities and how he gives us something in central midfield that neither Xhaka nor Torreira precisely reproduce?
He gives us something else. I think.
Do you agree that he was great, or are you a little?
Yeah, I think he was. I think he was man. I think he was man of the match.
Okay.
And I thought he led the team. And when I thought we started off very, very good. It was all easy. Bournemouth stood off stupidly. We played them to death. And then we got a bit sloppy for half time. Xhaka tried just a couple of square passes that just encouraged them onto us a little bit. And then we started to just play in a contained way. And then at that point, I felt we were playing in areas a little bit further away from their goal. And that's when Guendouzi came into it for me. And what I really like, I like players that recognise the stress of the person in possession and put themselves out there to give them an option. And he did that a lot. And yeah, I thought he attracted people to him. I thought he played the referee beautifully. I thought he pulled off a lovely nutmeg just to embarrass people. He then smashed somebody in the head, which I also liked. After he took out, I think, Saka, and then he went through Gosling and said, "No, you don't do that. Take one." Got to be careful with the cameras, but I still liked it. The fact that he's imposing himself. And I thought he did really, really well in the ugly part of the game. And I also a big fan of Torreira. I just think Torreira is better at it, faster at it. You have to remember this game is like it's not a 10 out of 10 heavy rock, high intensity game. It was slightly lower than that. apart from a few periods towards the end. And I felt that suited Guendouzi's style. If we're playing against a top team, a top level, I do still prefer Torreira's ability to reach a higher level, a higher intensity and a higher speed in the collisions. But every game's different. I thought in this game, he did really, really well. And I think that role suited him more than the Xhaka role does, if you know what I mean, slightly to the left, where I think he wants to be in the middle. His personality wants to be central. It's a different style to Torreira, but maybe it suits him being right in the middle of the action, making it all about him. It just seems to suit him. And it's like, I saw loads of people on Twitter saying, I would absolutely hate him if he played for the opposition, but he plays for us, so it's okay.
Yeah, and people forget, I mean, Cesc Fabregas was spiky as hell. By the way, I'm not saying he's Cesc Fabregas. Like, anytime you invoke that name, I think people want to make the point that they're not the same player. They're clearly not the same player. But yeah, it is definitely the case that I think some of these young players who come through with big talent and big potential also have big personality. You need to. Cesc had it as well. Clive, let me stay with you just for a second. I don't want to overemphasize it. I think he's under a lot of scrutiny, and some of it is not deserved, in my opinion, but it's not quite happening for Pepe. He had another moment in this game where he beat 3 different guys off the dribble, got into the box. I thought he was going to sort of pass it into the side netting on the far side. He went near post and sort of just kind of snapped at it. He didn't really give it that quality curled finish that he can do. I don't know that he necessarily has the easiest job right now because of the way we're using Bellerin. He always has to beat 2 men if he's going to do much. And I think, and this is just me speculating, that maybe Arteta told him to keep it a little simpler, to try to simplify his game, because I noticed in this game he did more simple layoffs to Bellerin, simple layoffs to Wilk, just giving the easy pass, and there were fewer instances where he tried to beat his man off the dribble. So maybe he was either just playing within himself because he didn't have the confidence, or maybe because Arteta told him, hey, don't worry about it, just give the easy pass. I'm not sure, how to interpret that, but I still rate him highly. I still think what he does is special, and I still think playing on that right side where he doesn't have the overload and the overlap would be a challenge for anyone we put in that position. I don't see anyone necessarily thriving in that way. Am I being overly generous to him?
I do feel, I can't sit here and spend the last few years criticising Mesut Ozil for sometimes poor body language and intensity, and not note that you look at him and think you could do a bit more, mate. Do you know what I mean? I think you could do a bit more. I do think his role on the outside does restrict him, because for a player that can go multiple ways, to make sure he sort of restricts his ability to move off the dribble. But I also think he just needs to develop that combination with the player inside, which is Willock. Willock is a bit more direct. He drove away from him. So on I think it might have been the first goal, I think it was Pepe that got the ball deep. He accelerated the play, did a difficult shake and move and pass, and that allowed Willock to sort of turn the play and start to go towards the left. If you looked at it, there was a return pass to Pepe through the lines if he wanted it, right? So he started to move, he accelerated the move, he spun off his man. I think the development for him is not what he does on the ball, but it's how he drives off the ball. I think if he can start to run through lines, I think he'll be very, very dangerous, because when he arrives in the box, I think he's got an idea what he does. So he's developing. We all see him dribble, stop the ball, fend people off, keep it safe side, turn around, beat a man, pop it, where we know you can do that. But once it's gone, your off-the-ball movement needs to improve. It needs to be a bit more Martinelli-like, a bit more Aubameyang-like. Can you arrive in those spots in the box for the tap-ins? Can you run through lines? And I think once he adds that aggression to his game, which will come with fitness, I think he will be a top player in this game. He just did what he had to do. He kept it, attracted people, and that allowed the overload. And the tilting that Tim spoke to was caused by the fact you can't leave him one-on-one. You got to double up, which means someone else is going to be free. And that's how it works. And we use that really smartly by switching out to left-hand side.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I think there are certain players who, even if it's not totally happening for them, add things in your team that you need and that are dangerous and that are special, and so you keep them in there for those things. And I do think that Pepe's escapability and his dribbling, it creates a different kind of problem. I mean, Tim, in the what was it, 22 pass move? Yeah, 22 passes for the goal. Pepe has a couple really important moments in that goal. It starts with him sort of wriggling out of danger on the right wing up against the touchline, isolated all by himself. There's another moment where it comes back. The move had a few movements from left to right and right to left. But, I mean, do you get the sense that Pepe is still adding enough with his dribbling and some of the other things he does that we just need to be patient and let it happen for him?
Yeah, he's not quite, is he? He's not quite at the moment. I was thinking this actually when you were discussing Nketiah, and because I know this is a harsh thing to say when he scored, but I still have my doubts that he's an Arsenal striker. I think he can be a really good striker. Whether that will be for Arsenal, I'm still not sure, because my thing with Nketiah, right, is does he do enough? And if a striker, is his link play good? Are his partnerships? Is his passing? Is his hold up play? I don't think any of those things are there. And if those things aren't there, like those things aren't really there in Aubameyang, but he scores 30 goals a season, so it doesn't matter. If you don't bring much else to the party, you got to have a whole shitload of end product. And I think it's similar for Pepe. I'm quite relaxed with the idea that he's going to be at this particular moment in time, and hopefully time and rhythm and everything else align this out, that he is just going to be a little bit frustrating. He is going to have times where he tries to beat three guys, it doesn't quite come off, we lose the ball, and you go, oh, for fuck's sake. But once or twice a game, he'll do it. He'll beat those players. And so the thing is, where I see him at the moment, is those players who perhaps lose the ball a bit too often, perhaps aren't great with the structure. And I agree with what you're saying, by the way. He's kind of isolated in this structure, and that's obviously because Arteta thinks he can cope with that, and that's a sign of that Arteta rates him, that he'd rather have Pepe doing that than say Martinelli and Saka. He's thinking, right, okay, if I leave Pepe on his own, he's going to be all right. Maybe he won't be at his maximum, but he'll do okay. But where I see Pepe on the axis at the moment is he going to be like Alexis Sanchez and yes, lose the ball a shitload, but score and create 30 goals a season so it doesn't matter? Or is he going to be like Arshavin, who, loses the ball a shitload and doesn't contribute defensively and just doesn't quite do it often enough for you to think, yeah, that's worthwhile having in my team? I think he's on that cusp at the moment. And I wouldn't make any panic decisions at the moment. I don't think he's playing terribly. I don't think he's costly to us at the moment, but I think the end product has to raise the end product a little bit, even given that he's a little bit isolated, and that's kind of fine. I didn't see him at Lille, but I imagine he was maybe a little bit isolated for Lille as well. It's just that they had bigger spaces to play in. So it's one of those things that I'm not massively panicked about. And look, in terms of his adaptation as well, as far as I'm concerned, that started all over again, because what he came into under Emery was not really a team. And
he didn't
it's
play
almost
much
like that's like a false start, right? Just like it was a false start for the young players, and it was a false start for Tierney for different reasons, and a false start for Ceballos, and indeed that might be the end for Ceballos. There's a lot of false starts going on for these players, so he's almost starting again, and this is his adaptation period again. So I'm not unhappy with him at the moment, but essentially what I'm saying is that he's a bit of a luxury player, which is fine. Neymar's a luxury player, Messi is a luxury player, that's fine. But when you're a luxury player, you've got to have the end product.
Yeah, it's like Ozil, right? You can't have 2 assists or 0 assists or whatever the hell he's on this season if you're a luxury player, right?
Exactly, and that's the kind of the tightrope at the moment that Pepe is on.
Yeah, the only difference I would say is that I think certain skills like dribbling can add something to your team that is almost in and of itself as valuable as end product in some ways. Look at Adama Traore and the way he changes the calculus for defenses and how they have to defend Wolves. I want to bring Clive back in, and I'll just make the point too. It's always sliding doors with Pepe, I feel, because when Willock turns and drives at the defense and ultimately winds up creating the goal, the 22-pass goal for Saka, I think he gives the ball too late. And that's not a critical thing. Like, look, the goal still happens. It's great work by Willock, but the slip through ball is on for Pepe when he turns and runs at defenses, and Pepe makes a great run. And Willock doesn't really see it. He's just staring down Martinelli the whole time and then gives it to Martinelli. Great, worked out, no problem. But under a different circumstance, maybe Pepe gets slipped in there and he scores. It's just one of those things. Clive, I know you have to run, but do you want a quick coda on the Pepe conversation?
Yeah, I've had this theory where, you heard me say it. Can he play the role inside? So it's the Ozil role, the Willock role. Can he come one in and be part of the build-up? Because I think his ability to receive it, turn around is top class. Sometimes on the outside, I think he might need something else. So would a Martinelli be good out on the right-hand side, working hard on that touchline, using his ability to do exactly what I spoke about earlier, which is running off the ball. When we get it second phase, he will run through. He will arrive on the back stick. And I think Pepe's personality is to receive it, create movements for the next pass or the next shot. So I actually think he's more of a creator finisher than a winger that really wants to spend all his time out there. And I always revert back to the Tifo football video that came out last year, April, speaking about Pepe and his role. And they said whoever gets him, they've got to allow him a freedom to be creative. And if you look at all the videos of him, there's a creative side, not just a goal side. And I think we'll see more of him when he is that number 10 player. I really believe that. We need to get him off the sides, allow more industrial players to play off the side, and then make sure we get our super talent on this one step inside. And also he's got ability to shoot, pass, and create. So that's my future upgrade for him when the moment is right.
Yeah, I mean, I could also see him playing center forward in some situations. I also think if we gave the right-sided fullback the permission to overlap him, then I think it's a totally different situation. You can't defend him one-on-one. But right now he's in a crowd scene constantly. And, you're only going to win those dribbles so many times. So Clive has to run. Tim, I'm going to keep you around for just another minute if you don't mind, because I just want to finish on a couple of things. Clive's on Twitter at ClivePFC. Thanks, Clive.
Thank you very much.
By the way, as I'm saying goodbye to Clive, just mention our Project 36, The Return, 4 games left in that. There's still time to go there and adjust your scores and predictions if you want. Remember, with this one, we're letting you update those with the new information at your fingertips. So if you want to go to the Project 36 Return and adjust your predictions, there is a shirt up for grabs for that. So Tim, final, just real quick takeaways here. Look, Mustafi did great. Really happy for him. I'm not sure I'm going to buy a Mustafi redemption arc because I still think that the mistakes that are in him are more than we should and can tolerate on a regular basis. But he gets injured. Maybe it's just a pull. Maybe it's a rupture. Whatever the case is, it exacerbates an already significant problem at center back. And part of the reason for me that it's a significant problem is not just that all we have now are 2 30-plus-year-old central defenders and Rob Holding. It's that Rob Holding still looks miles away from being ready. He did get on in this game. I don't think he looked great. I do think he was at fault for their goal. I get it. Look, he's a young guy just coming back from a long-term injury after having only really just started to develop into being a first-team player when he got injured, so it's even harder. But you still have to evaluate the situation. And for me, the situation is Rob Holding doesn't quite look close. Do you have the same assessment?
Yeah. He actually had one really good moment near the halfway line, actually, where he got in a duel and he won a couple of tackles. And to be quite honest, it was all going on at the other end for me. So I didn't have a fantastic vista of the Bournemouth goal and there were a lot of balls coming into our box at that time, and my perspective on it wasn't great. But yeah, I mean, look, Mustafi's been playing for a reason, right? And it's because Holding's not quite there yet. I think what people don't understand with cruciate ligament injuries, and I think it's worth explaining this a little bit. I've never had one myself, but just from talking to a couple of the players on the women's team who've had them, the problem is not usually the injury in and of itself. Like the cruciate ligament heals okay. That's not the problem. The problem is that after surgery, they're sat on the couch for 6 weeks and they can't move.
Yeah.
And what happens is their muscle mass deteriorates, and it deteriorates quickly. When you're a professional athlete that trains every single day and goes to the gym every single day, and you drop that down to nothing, all your muscle goes. And that's the problem. You're building your muscles up from zero to Premier League elite athlete, and that takes a long time to do. And that's where the problem comes. That's why you get muscle injuries. And actually it's the muscles tiring that then makes the the likelihood of recurrence higher, because your movements change, and if you jump and you're a bit tired, your landings are a bit, so it's actually not the cruciate ligament itself that is the issue. It's building that muscle back up. And we're seeing it with Bellerin as well, and he's it's over a year since the injury. He's been back for months, but not at the level. And it will be the same for Holding, and he's he had a secondary knee injury as well. So it is entirely understandable, and I think a lot of supporters have to get over the idea that once a player comes back, that's it, they're back. Like I spoke to Danielle Carter, who's a forward from the women's team last year, after her first game back. Unfortunately, she re-ruptured her cruciate ligament a couple of months later. But when I was speaking to her about her rehabilitation, and she said, my rehabilitation's not over. This is another step. It's a significant step, but my rehab is continuing. Just because I'm playing again, that process hasn't stopped. And so I think we, just as an explainer, and I'm probably a long-winded one, there's
sure,
quite a lot
that
that goes into that. So no, Rob Holding isn't quite going to look himself, and he probably won't for a few games. It's one of those catch-22s as well, where he'll probably need a few games to get into his stride, but whether he's fit enough to have a run of games, we've had to manage that situation with Bellerin quite carefully, and now he's had 2-3 games in a row. And, once Holding gets there, then maybe we can make more of a judgment. But there's a reason that Mustafi has been playing, and I don't think it's because Arteta thinks that he's a better or more reliable defender on the whole than Rob Holding is. It's because he's not quite fit enough yet, and understandably so. I think that's well within the normal timeline of recovery from what was quite a complicated ACL injury.
Yeah, no, that's all well said and good circumspection, and I think we should panic, and Rob Holding should probably just be dropped. No, I'm just kidding. I think you've nailed it, but Tim, that still leads to the inexorable point that we don't have center backs right now, and we need them. Mm-hmm. So, I mean,
yep.
I don't care what you think we have left to play for this season. You cannot have Luiz, Socrates, and a not ready Holding as your only center backs, plus, I guess, Granit Xhaka. It's just not acceptable. And I mean, we're probably into the quarterfinals. I mean, I don't want to brush aside Pompey. That's not fair. I mean, maybe they could do something, but we may well be in the quarterfinal of the FA Cup. One of Chelsea or Liverpool will likely be going out in the next round. The Europa League is always a possibility, and it offers Champions League, as we constantly point out. So, we have things to play for, and this won't stand. The club has to move now and do something at center back, whether it's this Mari character or someone else. I mean, since you're here, do you want to quickly comment about Pablo Mari?
Yeah, sure. So this is he's good. He's fine. This is a Chamber. If it goes through, this is a Chambers Mustafi level. Or rather, it's a replacement for them. This guy is not, I think, going to revolutionise our defence or solve all our problems or anything like that. It's a warm body that can play centre back. He's left-footed. Flamengo play broadly similarly to the way that Arteta wants Arsenal to play. They have Felipe Luis at left back, a brilliant left back, unbelievably underrated left back. Even at the age of 34 at the moment. And for Flamengo, Felipe Luis flies up and down that left-hand side, a bit like Saka and Kolasinac do for us. And so he's used to kind of covering that left half space. He plays the ball well off of his left foot. He's not a world beater. He's 26. And you can look at the clubs he's been at. He's doing all right at Flamengo. There's perhaps a concern that the thing is, Flamengo are miles ahead of all of the domestic competition. So, the continental competition, they're the best team in South America by some distance. So there's a question there about whether he really comes under enough pressure as a defender in quite an inferior league in the Brasileirão. But I don't think it'd be a bad signing. I think the club are perhaps wise to go, let's go loan with an option to buy just in case. They might have to change their plans on that now, but I think that made a certain amount of sense. I think it would, if it goes through, it will be an expedient signing that makes a fair amount of sense. It's a guy who's 26, he's not a kid, he can slot in, and he can probably do the job that Callum Chambers would have been doing for us, for example, and he's not Mustafi, so it's one of those. It would have been a fairly expedient signing. I'm not going to tell you it would have been hugely exciting, but neither do I think that he would have been an absolute disaster area. The only other thing I'll say quickly is go and watch a video of him if you've got the time, because his frame, if not his style overall, is unbelievably similar to Per Mertesacker. He's about 6'6" and he's all legs, and he's a stand-up tackler. He never goes to ground, and he does that thing that Mertesacker used to do, the go-go gadget legs thing. Mm-hmm. And he does those interceptions very nicely where you don't think he's got any chance of getting the ball, and then he extends that left leg about 20 feet and gets there. That's very much his style, but he's not quick, and perhaps that's a concern.
Yeah, I mean, we have to do something though, right? Like
yeah.
I don't even know I think we're in a beggars can't be choosers territory now, right? There just has to be someone.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
and if it comes to the stage where we have to go obligation to buy with Mari, or we have to cough up a bit more money, I mean, it's not, as much as I don't want Arsenal to waste money, this is like a Mustafi or Chambers level signing, but it's a lot cheaper than both of those were. It's not 30 million on Mustafi. We're talking 7-8 million pounds, which is, for Arsenal, even if they don't have an awful lot of money at the moment, that's not gonna, like, if we sign someone for 7 million and it doesn't quite work out, that's not going to hamstring us.
Would you say? I mean, the issue is wages, right? Because like you look at play, like Gabriel came in and we shifted him pretty easily. Kolasinac, we can't move. Mustafi, we can't move. So as long as he's on wages that are reasonable, this is not an amount of money we have to worry about.
Yeah, in fact, I think Gabriel is a better, that's a better kind of, this is a guy who'll be third or fourth choice. Maybe he can challenge to be first choice. He'll be on that level of transfer fee, that level of wages. And you're exactly right. He's Spanish as well. There'll be plenty of Spanish. If in 18 months it hasn't worked, there will be plenty of Spanish clubs he can go to. He's been to South America now. He's got a reputation over there. He could probably go back to Flamengo if that's what he wants to do in 18 months' time. I make you right. He's 26 as well. This is not someone that we will be lumbered with for years and years on huge wages that we can't shift.
Yeah,
I agree.
And under the circumstances, sometimes you have to do things that wouldn't be your first choice. I mean, look, squad building is important, and you can never take your eye off the ball of what you're trying to build. But you have to make it through a season. Like sometimes you don't have a choice. So hopefully we get something done. I mean, in your estimation, do you believe a center back or two, ideally, will come in before the end of the window?
I do, yes. Okay. I think I don't know which one. I think one of the balls that's currently in the air will drop. I don't know which one, but I do think they'll get it done.
I keep waiting for mine to drop as well. And then as far as Ceballos, do you think he'll leave?
I wouldn't be surprised. I think that he will be asking that question and saying, can I go now? It's just a case of whether the club sanction it. When I was at Arteta's press conference on Friday, he was very lukewarm on Ceballos. One of the interesting answers to one of the questions, he was asked about a new defender, and he said, yeah, the club are trying to do that. And, he made, I can't remember the exact wording, but like he made reference to other positions effectively. You're saying like depending on the market. And I just wondered if he meant, well, if we can get someone in, maybe we'll let Ceballos go. He was very lukewarm when he was questioned about Ceballos. And yeah, I think with like the Euros coming up, I'm certain he'll want to go. It's just a case of whether it will happen.
Yeah, that's how I read his comments as well. Well, I think we can leave it there because Amy's coming up to talk about the Academy kids and to talk about transfers as well. So there's still more to come, but Tim's on Twitter @Stillberto. Thanks, Tim.
My pleasure as always.
All right, we'll take a really quick break for a little fun music, and then we'll be back with Amy. Stay with us. And now I'm delighted to have Amy Lawrence back on the pod. You can find her on Twitter @AmyLawrence71. You can read her at The Athletic, which of course you should be doing, using our promo code, of course, theathletic.com/ArsenalVision. And most importantly, you should be reading her phenomenal book, 89, available at greater booksellers everywhere. Again, the book is 89, and I can tell you it is phenomenal. And once again, hello, Amy.
Hi, Elliot. How you doing?
Yeah, great. It's good to chat with you. I think two topics that we sort of wanted to cover. We'll talk transfers maybe at the tail end for the #clicks, but let's start by talking about the kids. The kids are all right, as they say. And obviously the Bournemouth game, just another example that there's a lot of talent at the club right now at the youth ranks. And I think, we sort of remember with fondness Project Youth under Arsene Wenger after the move to the Emirates, and it was successful in many ways. I'm not sure even at the height of that movement that there was the amount of talent, young talent at the club that there is now. I mean, certainly players like Cesc Fabregas fall into a different kind of category, but just in terms of the sheer numbers of talented players right now, I think it is sort of a unique situation. I'm wondering if there's maybe one who has caught your eye unexpectedly, possibly someone who going into the season or maybe a couple seasons ago wasn't on your radar and now you think has the possibility to really make it at the club?
That's a good question. And the one thing I would say is that to an extent, the very nature of youth development is that, the excitement that you hear about certain names coming through when they're maybe 14, 15, 16, is so seldom realised across the whole of football, across the whole of the world. When you look at the numbers game, they talk about that 99 point whatever percent that don't make it. I'm always slightly in awe. It feels kind of miraculous that anyone, in a sense, in today's world of football makes it through to be so impactful and exciting, and give you that sense that they can play now, that they're ready now, and that you hope that there's even more potential to come with experience and with progression. And I agree with you to an extent that when you make the comparison with Project Youth, I mean, there's the one very obvious contrast is that Project Youth under Arsene Wenger was in the main quite overseas based. So the real most exceptional talents that came through, whether, particularly those teenagers at 17, 18, like Anelka, Cesc Fabregas, and so on, were often recruited from abroad. And, you guys in the States will remember Carlos Vela. I remember being tremendously excited about Carlos Vela, who was regarded at that time as the talent in the whole world. And he was from Mexico, and they got him to come to London, and it seemed so improbable. And he scored these ridiculous trademark lobs every 5 seconds.
Chips
and you
Vela,
thought, what is this guy? Yeah. And it never quite happened for him at Arsenal in the way
he still managed to hurt Americans
on
the international
He certainly
stage.
has had a great career, for sure. But what I think is more interesting about this group is that it's, obviously Martinelli being, a very big exceptional case. And of course, Bellerin is more reminiscent of those kids that come over from somewhere at 16, 17 and feel homegrown, even though they're obviously from somewhere else. But to have a bunch of Londoners is a really a whole different ball game. So when you're talking about particularly Nketiah, Willock and Saka, who've all been ingrained in the club from boyhood, who've all been going down to Hale End since they were 7 or 8 years old. Not Nketiah, slightly, because he came from Chelsea a little bit later. But there is this generation with Smith Rowe and people like that who've been at the club for a very long time and going through all the age groups. And they're local lads, and so they grow up with it kind of in their blood and under their skin. And you just feel something a little extra in that situation, especially when there's a gang of them and they bond. But equally, it's a really long answer. I'm sorry about this.
No, keep going. It's great.
When you look at the bond between, say, Saka and Martinelli, who have known each other for 9 months or something, and come from completely and utterly different backgrounds, is a beautiful example of kind of the kind of globalized world of football, where if people connect, doesn't matter where you're from, you can make a big song and dance of one of our own and all that stuff. But Martinelli still feels kind of like one of Arsenal's own, which obviously seems ludicrous if he's not even been a year at the club and he's from a different continent. But there are vibes going on. And I think when you have a lot of exciting young players, because what young players bring is fearlessness. And, it seems like a long time ago, but some of us oldies can remember being young and thinking that, everything was exciting and possible. And that's what they embody. But it's hard to do that. It's hard when you're a young player with these pressures and you come in to not take the safety first option and be brave. And that was something Arteta called out from the Bournemouth game. That bravery, that courage to try stuff. And it's very exciting when that comes from young players because it's so natural.
Yeah, and I think you hit on the point about sort of a group, a collective, and a collective that's from England and specifically London in some cases, and it makes it easier to hold on to them, but also I think gives them a sense of shared ambition, wanting to do something together. And I realize it is overstating it to refer back to the United class of 92, but a great example of a group of youngsters that came through together and achieved great things together as a group. And you don't need every one of them to be superstars. They can be role players. They can be important squad players. I mean, I think also for a club like Arsenal, where the finances are under scrutiny and the budget is carefully managed, that when you can develop important squad players even from your academy, you make it a lot easier to rebuild something special. I think you referenced Saka, and he's a really fascinating player to me. He's the one who I think sort of burst onto the scene. Maybe people weren't even aware of him. I'm not a keen academy watcher, and it was sort of a surprise to me how precocious his talent was. And now he's sort of doing it at left back, ironically, in a season where Arsenal have spent quite a lot of money on a left back. I'm curious to get your take specifically on Saka and whether you think maybe this left back role is something that the club will be interested in getting a closer look at him for, or if you still think that his future, and he scored a beautiful goal, obviously, in the Cup against Bournemouth just last night, if his future is indeed on that left wing, terrorizing defenses and scoring goals.
I think the beauty of his situation is that that's kind of up in the air at the moment, and you feel like either is possible. So that's to his credit. I guess circumstances will dictate a little bit, and I think this whole experience, the amount of football he's been able to play this season, he was promoted. He was one of those promoted early from, there's almost a rite of passage thing where down at the training ground, there's the one side of the facility is all the changing rooms and sort of certain areas concerning the younger age groups, and then the other side of the facility is the first team, and in between is some of the shared areas like the gym and the canteen and restaurant and other bits and pieces. And
I know which part I'd be in. There is a certain
it's a big moment for a young player when you've grown up and you spend obviously it's a big moment to come through the gates. Anyway, be your base, that be where your learning space is, and your development area for football. Then you obviously spend a period of time with your own age group on one side of the facility, and then all of a sudden you say goodbye to some of those guys because you're moving over. It's a massive thing. It's a massive deal, and for Saka and Willock in particular, I think these were kids who benefited from making strong appearances last season in cameos when they played, bits and pieces of cup games and so on. The time that they spent in the training ground when they were moving up to train with the first team, and the preseason tours have become a really interesting aspect of the development of these guys, because it's a time where the managers get to take a really close look at a boy's character, at how they integrate with the rest of the team, at how ready they are physically, how ready they are emotionally to take that promotion. And both of them, I think, kind of were always highly rated in the youth systems, but got that kind of nod to maybe go across full time earlier than perhaps expected or usual, because they made such a big impression in all those bits and pieces of action that they had when they were younger, those tasters, if you like. So that's the way they've taken to it with such ease. It looks like the most natural thing in the world for both of them to step onto any pitch, any opponent, any teammate, any situation, and handle it. And that's what I think is really exciting, because they look so like they're just able to absorb their experiences and try and grow from them. And I think Saka in fact, there was a really sweet moment that after the Eintracht Frankfurt game, when I think that was a sort of real explosion moment for Saka in particular, being involved in the goals, and it was a bit of an announcement moment. And afterwards, we got the chance to chat to him. He was just such a sweet, thoughtful, really well-adjusted, impressive young man coming out to talk to some of the press. And I remember asking him about how it felt, particularly in relation to him and Joe Willock, who, for years and years had been going on the same sort of journey, if you don't mind that word, together through their football education. And suddenly they're playing in a European match that was scheduled to be quite hostile and quite difficult, and they were absolute stars. And he said there was a moment when they just looked at each other on the pitch, as if to say, look where we are, look where we've come. And we took that shared experience when you have, a group of young players together, it does kind of accelerate that momentum, if you like. And you mentioned the class in 92 and all that. I would maybe arsenalize it a bit further and say, actually, the class of 89 is a really, really good comparison.
You'd be the right person to speak to about that.
Funnily enough. But, when that was a really interesting blend between the people that were external and this young homegrown core. Obviously, they had to have phenomenal talent, which happened to be a great group at the same time. Tony Adams, Michael Thomas, Paul Merson, David Rocastle, Niall Quinn. There was a real exceptional group. And I think that gave them a kind of extra power, that they were all in it together, having known each other for a very long time. And I think that if the blend is right, and this is what's interesting in terms of how Arsenal evolve from having this exciting young group, can they give them the platform and create the right environment around them for them to sort of flourish in the way that everybody would hope? So the bits of the jigsaw around them have to be almost perfect. And I'm fascinated to see how Arteta assesses the Arsenal squad as it is now, and what it might be if he's allowed to bolster it and make some improvements over, windows to come, to try and give them the right things around them so that these guys become part of a more successful team.
Yeah, one of the most effective growth hacks you can have in football in terms of trying to shortcut the return to glory, so to speak, is to have players from your academy come through and succeed, because obviously you've invested in them, but you don't have to spend big on them. They're easier to tie down unreasonable wages. They're more likely to stay, and you can build around them. And I think this is why it is tricky for Arsenal right now. Raul, I think it was last year, gave an interview, and he was very clear about the importance of the academy. And Amy, I just think, we kind of scratched our heads a little when we let Iwobi go, although to be fair, we got a really good fee for him, and when Mkhitaryan was allowed to leave. And on the one hand, there may be some short-term pain that we are experiencing and have experienced as a result of that, but it is incumbent upon the club right now to find a way to be competitive while not blocking the path to first-team football for some of these young players. And that's really tricky, right? Because young players inherently are going to be inconsistent. You're not going to get, week in, week out top-tier performances from them, but you need to give them playing opportunities. And in a way, if this season, and especially the league season, is a blessing in any respect, it's that between now and the end of the season, Arteta's sort of free to give a lot of minutes to young players and academy players because there's not a huge amount on the line in the league. And so, maybe that will be a sort of fortuitous way that we're able to develop them and have them continue their growth into being something special for the first team. Just really quickly, we haven't mentioned Reiss Nelson. I just want to touch on him. I think he's a great example of how we don't necessarily know what the trajectory is going to be for these young players. I think everyone would have agreed that he was the biggest talent in the group a couple of seasons ago. He had sort of a few eye-catching moments in Germany, and I think there was an expectation that he would go to the next level. When Arteta first came in, he was selecting him ahead of Pepe, and then picked up an injury and hasn't been in the team as much. Do you still think that he could be sort of one of these really important figures from this academy that could step forward and fulfill some of the potential?
Well, I think that Arteta's faith that he showed in him from the off was a real kind of signal to Reiss Nelson. And what probably in many ways of all the players that have come through and that we've talked about, Reiss Nelson's maybe the one who, talent-wise, there weren't so many question marks, but there was perhaps a bit more question marks about whether he had all the best attributes to make the best out of his talent. And maybe it looks like Arteta has seen something in him to have that trust in him from the get-go, and he's spoken very glowingly about the potential that he feels he has. And it's a really, really easy comparison to make, and something that I think we should all be a bit wary of, because although Arteta has witnessed these kind of players flowering when he's been at Man City, Raheem Sterling is a perfect example of that. Needing a kid who needed more consistency, who had all the ingredients, but wasn't always getting the right amount of end product that people thought he was capable of. Kind of became this fully rounded footballer in that time. But actually kind of observing it and albeit helping out on that process is one thing. Doing it for himself when he's the manager of a club is another one. And I think everybody hopes that Arteta can produce on that front and can take some of these young players and add those finishing touches that are needed to enable them to become the best player that they can be. And yeah, when you look at it like that, of course, Reiss Nelson is a guy who is completely within that group in every way with Willock and Saka and Nketiah and so on. Interesting that there's so many more forward players than defenders coming through at Arsenal's academy, and it feels like it's been that way for a long time. It would be, in an ideal world, you'd maybe have more of a range of positions. But, there's certainly such exciting potential that if Arteta, as I said before, can help them to realise it and can put the pieces in place around, there's no reason to... It's a big leap to be saying, okay, Arsenal are going to make that jump that makes them contenders for the biggest honours, which is obviously what they want to do. That's too big a statement and too big a pressure to put on these guys. But can they be a core of a much improved Arsenal team? I'd like to think so.
Yeah, I certainly think so. And I mean, you look at what Arsene Wenger had to go through when he sort of built interesting teams after the Invincibles. I think about the 07-08 team and how quickly that team broke up with Flamini leaving and Hleb leaving and Fabregas ultimately leaving, and then he got Nasri, and Nasri left, and of course Adebayor left. The nice thing again...
Times, huh?
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, I think we deserve a lot of credit, and Arsene certainly deserves credit for keeping us relevant through all of that. But, maybe it is a case where we have a bit of a hybrid model now, where the Guendouzi's and the Martinellis don't stay, but the fees they secure allow us to build a really, really powerful team around the guys who do stay, like Saka and Nelson and Willock and whoever else winds up making it. I mean, I think it's unlikely that all of them will prove to be valuable first-team contributors, but you just need a few, plus a few big fees from some of these precocious young talents, and suddenly you're in a pretty good position that maybe you didn't see coming. So we'll have to keep our fingers crossed for that. Look, I can't let you go, Amy, without talking transfers since it's January, for the numbers. So, not from an ITK standpoint. I mean, I know you're with The Athletic, and so you are plugged into absolutely everything happening at the club at every single level, and you are Ornstein adjacent. But in terms of what we're trying to do right now and what the club should be doing, I mean, the league season is probably a throwaway, but there is an FA Cup quarterfinal at Pompey. FA Cup tie with Pompey that would put us into the quarterfinal. There's the Europa League, which could put us into the Champions League. So there's still things to play for. Mustafi went down with an injury that looked pretty nasty. Rob Holding, to me, still looks like he's a long way off being ready. It's not a great situation at center back, and the Mari situation sort of fell apart pretty quickly. It seems like maybe we weren't upfront with Flamengo about wanting a loan, or they changed their mind about it, wanting it to be a loan. I mean, how do you feel about how that situation was handled? Do you think that the club has to try to resurrect that or do something now at center back given the situation with Mustafi?
Well, considering they needed to do something at centre back even before Mustafi went down, I think that if they did enough that entailed Edu flying to Brazil and flying back with a centre back, irrespective of the fact that did or didn't kind of work out just yet, it's certainly enormous proof that this is an urgent situation, and it would be really negligent, I think, for Arsenal to let that one go and let any other possible irons in the fire go out as well. I think that when you also consider that Saka playing at left back for the period of time that he has done is a massive bonus, and that could have been a huge problem. The fact that Arsenal have been without two left backs for quite a lot of this season, when you put the combined absences of Tierney and Kolasinac into the mix, and have managed, is pretty remarkable and lucky, because it would have been not at all surprising had Saka, struggled with it or made some mistakes or found it too much pressure or what have you. And, you can be lucky once. I'm not sure they're going to get lucky again if there's a situation at the back and you've got to have a long-term emergency situation. There's too much of the season to go and too much to be achieved. And make no mistake, Arsenal, whatever the league table looks like, whatever the realistic situation is, really, 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 really want to get back in the Champions League this season, if at all possible, by any means. Now, to give themselves half a chance, they need a team with consistency. They need a team that can pray that somehow they can get a better run of results, and they deserve some better results under Arteta, but actually get them to be coming up the table, and suddenly the pressure's on, and maybe they might sneak into the conversation for fourth, or hit that Europa League with the hardest possible attack. So if they really are serious about that, you can't turn around on one hand and say, we really want to get back in the Champions League this year, even despite the chaos and fiasco of quite a lot of the first half of this season, and not back the manager with a squad that looks sensible. You can't do that. You can't leave him with like 230-something centre-backs, both of whom have either been injured or suspended at points of the season, and a guy who's coming back from a big injury. You can't.
No,
you can't be serious.
And I mean, I think
I would say that Granit Xhaka was a revelation the other day at centre-back. Whether he can do that on a longer-term basis, I don't know. Maybe that's something that they've got up their sleeve. But the signs are that if you go and try and bring a player over from Brazil, and it looks, to the point where there's photographs and there's video of them coming into the country with a load of bags, they better have a plan B if it doesn't quite work out for them.
Yeah, I mean, look, if for no other reason, Socrates is 31, David Luiz is 32. They can't be playing, 2 games a week down the entire stretch of the season, right? I mean, you can't ask them to try to win you an FA Cup and a Europa League while playing in the league, and you say, well, maybe they can rotate them out of the league. Well, right now, who would you rotate them for? A not ready Holding and a central midfielder in Xhaka are your 2 backup center backs. So I agree, it has to be done. I think a lot of people were looking to sort of put the boot into the club with the Paulo Mari thing because it looks like another example of Arsenal botching it late. But I have questions about that because I think...
No, but it's not. Well, I think we just have to hang on. It's like, wait till the end of January. I would not be critical until the window is closed. Let's wait and see what works out.
Well, and there's a few things, right, Amy?
Trust them at this point in time.
I mean, to me, the idea that we tried to pull one over on them and lie to them that we didn't want a loan, and then when we get them to London, say, oh, by the way, it's a loan. I mean, that doesn't strike me as plausible. It does strike me as plausible that maybe Flamengo, who's trying to rehabilitate their reputation with their fans, is not being taken advantage of, change their mind about it. I don't think there's anything wrong with the club wanting it as a loan with an option to buy, given that he is a prime age center back who's been plying his trade in Brazil and previous to that in the second tier of Spanish football. So, I could understand us, wanting that sort of trial period. But, as you said, let's wait and see how it shakes out. But what I do think is clear now is, while our need for a central defender was evident prior to the Mustafi injury, I mean, you certainly don't want to say Mustafi's a guy you're depending on, with all due respect. Now it is beyond evident. It is an absolute requirement. The club have to back Arteta because, I just don't see how you can be a serious club and, as you said, have the ambitions you state that you have if you're going to try to go through the rest of the season with 2.5 center backs, essentially. So we'll see what happens. I have taken up more of your time than was planned, so I want to thank you for that. Amy's on Twitter at AmyLawrence71. Amy, it is always a pleasure to chat with you, and I really do appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
Pleasure to chat as always.
I don't know who the us was there. Us being the podcast. I am not an us. Chat with me.
That's totally cool. That's how I interpreted it. It's totally brilliant.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was weird. Anyway, so that's it. Definitely read Amy's book, 89. It is a fantastic read. It is available at greater booksellers everywhere. And if you want to support your local bookstores, that would obviously be a fantastic way to do it. It obviously is about the Arsenal title run in 89. So that's something worth reading because who knows when the next one will be. In any event, though, we've got a lot more to come. We'll have stuff for patrons the rest of the week. Obviously, if you'd like to sign up, we'd love to have you. But either way, no big deal because we love you for being here anyway. And as we always say, we'll talk to you after Arsenal 10, Burnley 0.